The snap of the suitcase hitting concrete still rang in my ears. My daughter-in-law didn't even pause. As she walked away from me, a fresh widow, my own son stayed silent beside her. While they planned rooms and reputations upstairs, I unzipped the pocket she dismissed. The same file my husband marked for Lena day of pressed against my hand like a warning. That's when the truth opened. $19 million transferred solely to me months before he died. She threw out my luggage and cleared the path for my inheritance. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I knew something was wrong before I stepped into the room. The air felt too still, like the whole house was holding its breath. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the silence that had already decided to settle in. Tom sat in his armchair by the window, exactly where I'd left him an hour before. Same cardigan, same steady grip on his pen. The only thing different now was the stillness in his chest. I didn't cry, not right away. Instead, I reached down, took the pen from his fingers and set it gently on the side table. I'd bought it for him the Christmas he retired. He used it for every important signature since, including, I assumed, the one he'd made earlier that morning. My hands moved on their own, dialing Ethan, but it was Courtney who answered. "We'll take care of everything," she said before I could speak. Her voice was soft but distant. "Just get here." Click. "No, I'm sorry. No, are you okay, Lena? Just logistics." I didn't argue. By that evening, I was standing in the marble foyer of their oversized, over-decorated house on Lakeway, the Whitakers' new address, not mine. Courtney greeted me at the door like I was someone else's grandmother. One of those firm, practiced hugs that starts and ends on her terms. She smelled like grapefruit and ambition. "Guest rooms upstairs," she said, gesturing past the foyer. "We've got family coming in tomorrow, so you'll only be here a night or two. Hope that's all right." It wasn't a question. The room had been staged with fresh linens and a single orchid in a glass vase. I set my suitcase down at the edge of the bed and sat beside it, bones aching more from the weight of what I wasn't allowed to feel than the day itself. It was only when I finally unzipped the outer pocket of the bag that I remembered what I'd packed before I left the house. A sealed manila folder, heavy, labeled in Tom's unmistakable handwriting. For Lena, day of. No date, no instructions, just that, and I knew immediately he meant today. I didn't open it, not yet. My hands hovered, unsure if I was ready to know what he hadn't said out loud. The envelope pulsed like a live wire in my lap, humming with something more permanent than grief. Then came the knock. Courtney again, no pause, no hesitation. She cracked the door just wide enough to show her sharp profile. "I hope you haven't fully unpacked," she said, smiling like this was some kind of customer service exchange. "The girls need the room. We've booked you a suite at the Hillside Inn. It's quieter there, closer to the funeral home, too." I blinked at her. "Tom died this morning." She didn't blink back, and there's a lot to handle. I've already started consolidating his documents. Some of it's a mess, honestly. Of course she had. I looked down at the envelope still resting on my knees. Her eyes followed, quick and calculating. "What's that?" "Just something Tom left me," I said, standing slowly, placing the file back into the suitcase before she could get a closer look. Her lips twitched, but she didn't press. "I'll have Ethan bring the car around," she said. "You should rest." She left before I could respond. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, suitcase still closed. Everything about today felt like a hallway with no doors, just the pressure of being pushed forward, even if you didn't want to move. The room was too quiet now. Somewhere downstairs, I heard Courtney's voice, already on the phone with someone, maybe a florist, maybe a lawyer. I looked down at my suitcase again. Tom had never left anything to chance, not in 48 years. And this envelope wasn't meant to be unpacked like a sweater or a photograph. It was meant to change something or protect something. Maybe both. The conference room was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the polished glass walls or the fact that someone had dimmed the lights just enough to make the room feel theatrical, like a stage. Courtney had arrived early, of course she had. She stood near the head of the table, laughing lightly with the estate's financial rep as she unwrapped a box of miniature croissants and set down 2 tall espresso drinks with practiced ease. I watched her adjust one of the stir sticks like it mattered, as if presentat. Iron could rewrite grief. Double shot, no foam, she said, nudging the cup toward him like a prize. I remembered. Not once did her eyes drift to me, even as I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. No one offered me a chair. I didn't say anything, I kept my coat on. Ethan sat 2 seats down, thumbing the corner of a legal pad, his tie too tight, his face drawn. He looked up when I entered, then looked away just as fast. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, then closed just as quickly. The financial rep, Derek, I think, cleared his throat and began listing off the usual: account summaries, transfer delays, upcoming appraisals. It was clear they'd met before, comfortable, even. Courtney nodded along as if she'd built the estate from scratch. We've been managing everything for years anyway, she said lightly, brushing an invisible thread from her blazer. Tom trusted us to keep things running smooth. Us? There was no us in how she said it. I stood quietly near the window, didn't interrupt, didn't reach for a pastry or the single carafe of hot water that sat untouched at the end of the table. There were no teacups, no ceremony. Just espresso for her, nothing for me. She kept talking about streamlining accounts, closing old business lines, modernizing the trust structure. Ethan nodded mechanically, like someone who hadn't read the paperwork but didn't want to admit it. Still, I said nothing. Not when Derek suggested combining assets. Not when Courtney offered to act as central point of contact for legal and financial correspondence. Not even when she referred to Tom's legacy as a brand, really. I let her perform, let her claim the room. It was easier that way. The meeting wrapped fast, 15 minutes and a handshake. As the chairs scraped back and coats came on, Courtney touched Ethan's arm. I'll meet you in the car, don't forget to ask about the funeral invoice. She was already texting before the door even shut behind her. I waited until the hallway noise faded. Pamela Rhodes lingered at the far end of the table, packing her briefcase slowly. Her hair, still salt and pepper thick, was pinned precisely like always. The quietest person in the room, yet the only one whose presence had weight. She looked up when I stepped toward her. I have something, I said simply. Her eyes searched mine for half a second, then she nodded. Privately. I slid the sealed envelope from my handbag and laid it on the polished oak. Her fingers brushed the name on the front, for Lena, day of, and her expression changed just enough for me to catch it. Recognition, maybe respect. She didn't ask what was inside, not yet. Instead, she reached for her phone and typed something. We'll meet tomorrow, not here, she said, her voice calm. Bring nothing else, just this. I nodded once. As I turned to leave, my gaze landed on the untouched tray of pastries still sitting in the center of the table. Croissants with sugared tops folded too neatly to be real. Courtney's version of generosity. Not food for grief, just garnish. Pamela's office smelled like cedar and faint lemon, no scent of grief here, only decisions. The kind you don't come back from. She locked the door behind us without a word. The blinds were already drawn, her assistant had been sent home early. I sat across from her as she slipped on a pair of reading glasses and opened the envelope with the kind of care usually reserved for documents much older or secrets much heavier. She read the first page in full, eyes scanning line by line without pause, then exhaled. Notarized, dated 4 months ago, witnessed by me. I looked up. You. I didn't know what it was at the time, she said, her voice even. He asked me to notarize it and not ask questions, said it would come to light when it needed to. Pamela laid the second page flat across the desk. I leaned forward. It wasn't a will. It was a full transfer of assets, $19 million from a discrete real estate portfolio I didn't even know Tom had kept active. Property holdings spread across 3 counties, all legally restructured into a fund bearing my name, not his, not Ethan S., just mine. He separated it entirely, Pamela said. It's clean, it's locked, and it's already moved. I blinked. He didn't want this debated in court, she added. didn't trust how things would be handled after. My throat tightened, but I held my voice steady. He was right. We sat there a while, me taking it in, Pamela reviewing the rest of the paperwork like a surgeon double-checking a successful operation. He included a clause, she added, tapping one paragraph. You're the sole manager, no co-signers, not even your son. I thought of Courtney, already rearranging the furniture and practicing widowhood in the mirror. She has no idea, does she? I asked. Pamela looked at me over the rim of her glasses. None. That evening, I booked a furnished rental 10 minutes away from the Whitaker house, close Eno. To watch the fallout, far enough to stay clear of the blast. It was a 2-bedroom brick duplex with neutral walls and creaky floors, the kind of place people passed by without noticing. Perfect. I unpacked nothing except the folder, which I tucked into the nightstand under a worn paperback and a ceramic dish filled with paper clips. I didn't call Ethan. I waited. The next message came from Zoe. Just one line. They're turning Grandpa's office into a yoga room. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. I imagined the smell of that room, old wood, aftershave, the faint metallic scent of the pen he never stopped using. I could see Courtney in yoga pants measuring curtains, removing memories like clutter. I replied, "Ask your father to call me when he's alone." She didn't text back right away, but I knew she read it. Zoe never needed more than that. I stood by the window of the rental, watching dusk slide over the rooftops. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was something colder, a kind of click inside, like a lock finding its match. They thought I'd be too sad to notice, too broken to fight, but they'd underestimated the thing that had always made me dangerous. I paid attention. Not to drama, not to noise. To paper. To silence. And Tom knew that, even in his last days, he left me not just a gift, but a lever. The paper came in a plastic sleeve, folded once, delivered by hand. A neighbor from the old block had dropped it off with a murmured condolence and a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. I thanked her, closed the door, and set the bread aside. The headline sat on the bottom third of the page. Thomas Whitaker, 74, real estate developer and philanthropist, dies in Austin home. I made my tea slow, kettle, loose leaf, steeped exactly 5 minutes before I even looked again. By the time I sat at the kitchen counter, the steam curled around the mug like something protective. I read every word. It listed his awards, his firm's donations, his lifelong commitment to revitalizing underserved communities. It mentioned Ethan, his devoted son, and Courtney, who was described as his loving daughter-in-law and active partner in the family legacy. There was no mention of me. Not as wife, not as co-founder, not even as the woman who shared 48 years of his mornings. I didn't flinch. It was too intentional to be an oversight. Someone had rewritten his story and cropped me out of the frame. I didn't need to guess who. Pamela called at noon. "We've begun the board seat transitions," she said crisply. "The asset documentation you gave me unlocked voting control. It'll take a few days, but you'll be listed as majority shareholder by early next week." I didn't speak right away. "You all right?" she asked, sensing something. "They published the obituary," I said. "It's a creative interpretation." Pamela exhaled through her nose. "Control doesn't begin with money, it begins with the narrative." I noticed. She paused, then added, "Let me know if you want to correct the record." I didn't answer, not yet. Late afternoon, Ethan finally called. "Hey, quick question," he began, voice brittle around the edges. "Courtney said something about accounts being frozen. She says there's a holdup with the transition and that you might know more." He sounded tired, not accusatory, just in over his head. I kept my voice calm. "Ask her to show you the will," I said, "then I'll show you what she missed." Silence. Then a small, nervous laugh. "That sounds ominous." "It's not, it's precise." Another pause. "Okay, I'll talk to her." He didn't say goodbye. Zoe came by just before dusk. She knocked softly, no text, no warning, and stood holding a canvas tote and a cinnamon muffin in a napkin. "I told them I was biking to Audrey's," she said. "I'm not." I smiled and stepped aside. She didn't ask questions, just kicked off her shoes and sat cross-legged on the floor of the small living room, surrounded by the quiet hush of a house that didn't pretend to be anything it was. From her bag, she pulled out a folded sheet of printer paper, hand-drawn in pencil. "I made this," she said, offering it to me without ceremony. I opened it carefully. A sketch of me wearing a simple crown, not flashy, more like a laurel, and holding a box with a large padlock drawn on the front. The key was tucked behind my ear like a pencil. A line of small text beneath said, "Some people hide things, some people keep them safe." My throat caught. I looked at her, but she was staring out the window, pretending she hadn't just handed me the clearest expression of loyalty I'd felt in weeks. "She's been talking to reporters," Zoe said quietly. "About Grandpa, about the foundation. She said the past should stay in the past." I nodded slowly. "She says she wants to clean the narrative up," she added, echoing Courtney's words with perfect mimicry, "like it's a mess." I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "You don't need to fix it," I said. Zoe shrugged. "I just want someone to remember it right." We sat in silence after that, her watching the sky go pink, me holding a sketch of the truth drawn in a child's pencil. The church was modern, too modern for Tom. Industrial lighting, exposed beams, and air conditioning that made the flowers wilt before the crowd could. They seated me in the second row, not front and center, not next to Ethan, just quietly off to the side like a distant cousin who arrived late. Courtney was everywhere. Her heels clicked purposefully down the aisle as she greeted mourners with the gracious exhaustion of someone who thought she was playing the widow. Her makeup was flawless, not a single smudge, and her black dress was just tight enough to signal that grief wouldn't ruin her posture. When she stepped up to the lectern, the organ fell into silence. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate the incredible life and legacy of Thomas Whitaker," she began, voice warm, performative. "My husband's father was a force in this city, not just for his vision but for how he inspired others to build with him." My husband's father. Not my father-in-law, not Tom. She'd already positioned herself as heir by tone alone. She spoke about his work ethic, his belief in progress, his commitment to community vision, a phrase she repeated 3 times like it had been written on an index card. People nodded, a few wiped tears. She recited achievements sprinkled with anecdotes clearly pulled from business memos and second-hand conversations. There was nothing personal, nothing real. I sat still. Across the aisle, Ethan stared at the floor. Pamela was seated further back, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Zoe sat next to her, wearing one of Tom's old pocket watches on a chain around her neck, legs swinging just above the floor. Courtney concluded with a polished smile. "Tom left behind a blueprint for the future, one we intend to honor, expand, and protect." Applause, brief but polite. She stepped back from the mic and dabbed her eye with a silk handkerchief. The room began to settle. That's when I stood. No one introduced me, no one expected me. I walked to the front in silence, the tap of my low heels deliberate, measured. I didn't go to the microphone, I didn't need amplification to be heard. "Tom left one more statement behind," I said. A few heads turned, some faces shifted from polite mourning to something sharper, curiosity with an edge. From my handbag, I pulled the single sheet of paper, the letter he'd handwritten and sealed inside the folder. The one Pamela confirmed had no legal force, only personal weight. That was enough. I opened it slowly, holding it with both hands as if it were something sacred. Then I read. "To my wife, Lena. You were never the one who needed recognition, and that's why you deserve it most. You built this with me, all of it. You're the last steward of everything we built, not because of blood or business, but because you never confused the two. Trust your judgment, use your silence like you always have as power, not permission. The rest will come. Tom." By the time I looked up, the room had changed. The silence wasn't respectful, it was recalibrating. A few people shifted in their seats. Others looked at Courtney, who sat stone-faced, her hand clenched around the edge of the pew. Ethan leaned forward, his mouth parted just slightly. His eyes flicked between me and the letter, and for the first time since the funeral began, he seemed awake. Courtney rose halfway like she might try to say something, but I didn't give her space. "There's more to say," I added, folding the letter carefully, "but some things don't belong in bullet points or press releases or eulogies with spreadsheets behind them." I stepped down without looking at her. Pamela nodded once as I passed. Zoe gave me a tiny smile. Back in my seat, I felt Courtney's stare before I saw it. Her face was tight, her smile was gone. And for the first time, she looked like someone who realized she wasn't holding the reins. The boardroom at Whitaker Holdings hadn't changed in years. The walnut table still gleamed under the recessed lighting, the framed, aerial photos of Tom's earliest development projects still lined the walls, a curated legacy of what he'd built, square by square. I arrived 15 minutes early. Not to prepare, to observe. Pamela was already there, laying out folders at each chair like she'd done 100 times before. Her blazer was slate gray today, severe but clean. She didn't speak as I entered, just gave a slight nod and continued. There were 12 seats at the table, only 11 nameplates. Courtney's wasn't among them. One by one, the board members trickled in: local developers, financial officers, 2 longtime partners who'd stood beside Tom since the early days. They shook my hand with a certain cautious politeness. Not cold, but not warm either. They hadn't decided how to receive me yet. Ethan came in last. His tie was crooked, and the skin beneath his eyes looked thinner than it had a week ago. He paused when he saw me already seated at the head of the table. "She's going to be furious," he said under his breath. "She already is," I replied. "This meeting isn't about feelings." He gave a quick, almost involuntary nod, not of agreement but of recognition. Then he slid into the chair nearest the corner and stayed quiet. Pamela stood at the front, shoulders squared. "This meeting," she said, "is being held pursuant to the bylaws outlined in the Whitaker Holdings Charter, subsection 14.2, founder incapacitation or death. The agenda is short: 1 vote." No one interrupted. She handed out a single-page resolution form. "As of this morning," she continued, "all shares held in the primary asset trust have been consolidated under Lena Whitaker, verified by counsel and recorded per Texas property law. Therefore, the board must vote to ratify the appointment of an interim chair." A pause. Pamela looked at me. I didn't speak, didn't gesture, I just waited. Hands went up slowly at first, then more assured. Every hand at the table, including Ethan's. "Unanimous," Pamela said. "Effective immediately, Lena Whitaker is interim chair of Whitaker Holdings." No applause, no congratulations. Just the soft scrape of paper against table and the faint exhale of change moving into the room. I leaned forward for the first time. "I won't be rebuilding," I said calmly. "I'll be restoring." Tom knew what was coming and he planned for it. Pamela stepped forward again, placing a thick binder in front of the board. "This is the protective structure Thomas Whitaker put into place 18 months ago. A fully segregated real estate fund, legally insulated from the will and from probate proceedings. It was activated upon his death. Only one person has control." She placed her hand on the binder, then on my shoulder. "That control is here." A murmur moved through the room. Ethan sat frozen, looking at me with a conflicted weight in his eyes, like a man suddenly aware of how much he hadn't been told. Someone toward the far end, a partner Tom had worked with since the 90s, cleared his throat. "Will this be contested?" Pamela's mouth tilted into something close to a smile. "It's already been insulated. What happens next won't be a courtroom matter, it'll be personal choice." Ethan spoke for the first time. "What about Courtney?" Pamela looked at him. She was never on the company's paperwork, and Tom removed her from the advisory list last fall. Ethan blinked. "She doesn't know that," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "No," I replied, "but she will." Outside the boardroom, the hallway smelled like fresh paint and expensive air freshener. I could hear voices echoing from the lobby. Someone was late. "Courtney." I didn't stop walking. Pamela stayed by my side, silent until we reached the elevator. She'll storm in, she said, when she realizes her badge doesn't work. I pressed the call button. Let her, I said. The doors opened. I stepped in alone. The photo Courtney posted went up less than 24 hours after the funeral. She'd chosen a shot of herself beside the casket, eyes cast downward, one manicured hand resting gently on the polished wood. The caption read, "Honoring a legacy, we promise to continue his vision with grace, purpose, and unity." She tagged Ethan, she tagged the foundation's draft page, the one still under construction, and she tagged 3 local journalists. Comments flooded in. "So poised. He would be proud. You're the heart of the Whittaker name now." I didn't respond. Instead, I kept the appointment Tom had set months ago with a man named Joseph Keene, his original asset manager, the one who helped him structure the very first investment deal that launched Whittaker Holdings nearly 40 years ago. We met at a private office off South Lamar, tucked between a dentist and a specialty paper store. No sign on the door, no receptionist, just Joseph, silver-haired, direct, still dressed like someone who refused to retire. "Tom told me you'd come," he said, shaking my hand like we'd already done this before. He didn't was. Tea time. Within 10 minutes, he'd laid out a map of upcoming land acquisitions, parcels along the river, outside the new toll expansion, areas no one was paying attention to yet. He'd planned to convert them into something lasting, something Zoe could carry forward, Joseph said. This isn't legacy, it's launch. And now it was mine to manage. I left with a folder thicker than Courtney's understanding of what she thought she owned. Pamela worked fast. By Thursday, the digital authority logins were transferred. Every legal document, every vendor contract, board resolution, signature required disbursement now required my name and my name alone. Courtney's emails began bouncing. Pamela didn't respond to the ones that came from Ethan's account, forwarded or phrased as if they were his own. "She's using him to stay in the loop," she said to me over coffee, "but the system doesn't lie, her access is revoked, she's scrambling." I nodded. Let her. Ethan hadn't called, hadn't asked to meet, he didn't argue, but more importantly, he didn't ask for clarity either. He was silent in the way people are when they don't want to face the answers already circling them. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't in the room where the real decisions happened, and it showed. I picked Zoe up from school that Friday. She didn't ask questions when I showed up instead of Ethan. She just dropped her bag in the backseat and climbed into the passenger side with a soft "hey." We drove in quiet. I bought us 2 mint chip cones from the corner stand near Tom's old development office. She unwrapped hers slowly, eyes half-lidded, shoulders soft. She was always quiet when she was thinking. I waited. Halfway through her cone, she finally spoke. "They're trying to redecorate Grandpa's study." I glanced at her. "But they won't touch his desk," she added, "not even her." I didn't press, I just nodded. The sun broke through the clouds in a narrow, focused line, hitting her cheekbone like a spotlight. "What would he say if he saw all this?" she asked. I finished the last bite of my cone before answering. "He'd say it's just furniture." Zoe smiled faintly, "And the rest?" "He left that with us." We sat in the car for another 10 minutes watching people pass by, no pressure to speak, just the calm before whatever came next. When I dropped her off, she hugged me tighter than usual. That night, I logged into the foundation's email server. Courtney had tried 3 times to reset the admin password. She failed every attempt. I didn't block her. I just let her keep trying. Some losses are louder when no one explains them. The courthouse smelled like dust and disinfectant, a scent that clung to everything it touched, including the nerves of the people waiting inside. Morning light slanted through the tall glass windows, catching on the polished floors and turning reflections into something distorted. Pamela walked beside me, calm as always, her briefcase held like a shield. She'd done this dance for decades, today was merely another step. Courtney sat at the opposite table, perfectly styled, jaw set so tight the muscles twitched. Her lawyer, a tall man with an expensive haircut and the strained posture of someone hired too late, shuffled a stack of papers he clearly didn't believe in. Ethan sat behind them, hands clasped, staring straight ahead as if he couldn't quite breathe. The judge entered, robes swaying, glasses perched low on his nose. He glanced at the docket, then at the room. Petitioner requests emergency injunction regarding access to estate assets pending probate, he read. Respondent contests on grounds of independent transfer of property executed prior to date of death. The words echoed. Courtney leaned forward like she was ready to pounce. Pamela remained still, hands folded. The judge nodded to Courtney's attorney. Proceed. The man cleared his throat. Your Honor, the petitioner asserts that significant assets belonging to the Whitaker estate were relocated without transparency and must be restored to the estate until appropriate distribution can be determined. The surviving family. Pamela rose so smoothly it broke his rhythm. Your Honor, if I may. She walked to the front with the quiet force of someone who didn't ask for the floor, she simply took it. She placed a thin binder before the judge. Inside are notarized documents dated 4 months prior to Mr. Whitaker's passing, she said. Executed independently of his will, designating full transfer and exclusive managerial authority to his wife. There is also email correspondence, timestamp meeting logs, and certified witness signatures confirming his explicit intent to keep the real estate fund separate. The judge flipped pages briefly, his expression unchanged but his attention sharpened. Pamela continued, voice cutting clean through the room. Texas law is explicit. Privately transferred assets outside probate remain outside probate, the petitioner's claim has no standing. Courtney shot to her feet. That's not true, he would never. The judge held up a hand without looking at her. Ms. Whitaker, you will sit down. The silence that followed was thick, embarrassing, final. The judge removed his glasses, folding them carefully. This court finds that the transfer in question was intentional, properly executed, and legally independent of the estate. Motion denied. Respondent retains full authority. The gavel struck once. Courtney's face drained of color. She sank back into her chair, hands shaking as she gripped the table. Her attorney leaned close, voice low, but the microphones caught it anyway. This fight's already over, she just hasn't raised her voice yet. Courtney stared ahead, blinking slow, realization spreading like cold water down her spine. Ethan stood, smoothing his suit jacket but didn't reach for her, didn't offer his hand, didn't speak. He looked at me. I didn't nod, I didn't smile, I just turned away and walked. Outside, the steps swarmed with reporters, lenses glinting in the Texas sun, questions flying through the air like thrown stones. Mrs. Whitaker, can you comment? Was there deception involved? Is the family divided? I didn't slow down. Pamela spoke softly beside me. You don't owe a narrative, not today. I kept my eyes forward, I know. Flashbulbs burst as I reached the car, but I didn't turn back, didn't acknowledge their noise. Courtney wanted attention, I dealt only in outcomes. Halfway down the courthouse steps, I heard footsteps rushing behind me. I glanced back. Ethan. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He wasn't looking at Courtney, who stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring at him like he'd just stepped off a cliff. He walked past her without stopping. He didn't speak until he reached me. I didn't know, he said quietly, about any of it. I searched his face. He looked older than he had a week ago, smaller somehow. You do now, I said. He nodded once, like someone accepting gravity. Behind him, Courtney's voice broke, not loud but sharp enough to slice the air. Ethan. He didn't turn. He kept walking. Toward me. Away from her. The mediation room was warm, windowless, and intentionally bland, beige carpet, beige chairs, beige walls, as if neutral tones could neutralize tension. It couldn't. Courtney sat across from me, spine ruler straight, chin lifted like this was another photo opportunity instead of a negotiation. Her lipstick was 2 shades bolder than usual, probably meant to signal power. But it didn't match her eyes, which flicked toward me, then away, then back again, never landing with confidence. Ethan sat beside her, suit wrinkled, collar unbuttoned, face drawn. He hadn't shaved. The bags under his eyes told me more than he ever would allowed. On my side, Pamela reviewed a slim folder. She'd already made clear this meeting wasn't legally binding, just one final attempt at family resolution, offered by the court as a courtesy. The mediator, a soft-voiced man in his 60s, sat in the center like a well-meaning ghost. He had kind eyes, too kind for the room. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began. "Our goal is not to rehash legal outcomes, but to explore whether harmony, personal or practical, might be possible moving forward." I said nothing. Courtney smiled almost convincingly. "That's exactly why I wanted this, for Zoe, for family." Pamela didn't flinch, neither did I. The mediator turned to me. "Mrs. Whittaker, would you be open to some form of shared advisory role or phased handover of certain assets, something that reflects unity?" I reached into my briefcase and placed 3 items on the table. First, the notarized letter from Tom, the one the judge had already acknowledged. Second, a printout of the chain of custody for the fund, including every legal timestamp and signature. Third, Zoe's folded drawing. The one with the crown. The one with the lockbox. The one labeled in pencil-scrawled neatness. "For the real boss." I slid all 3 forward. I didn't speak until the table was silent. Then I said it plainly. "I don't need peace, I have the truth." Courtney let out a tight breath. This is a performance. She's turning grief into leverage. Pamela arched a brow. She's turning documentation into clarity. Courtney ignored her. She looked at Ethan. "He was your father, don't you want this to be civil?" Ethan didn't look at her. He looked at me. Then slowly at Zoe's drawing, which he reached for carefully like it might burn his fingers. He held it a moment longer than necessary, then placed it back down without a word. Courtney turned toward him, sharper now. "Ethan." He blinked, slow and tired. "You threw her bags out on the day my father died," he said. It landed like a slap in a quiet room. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't lean forward, he just said it flat, factual, like he'd been waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. "Courtney." I went pale. "That's not what." "You didn't even wait for the body to be moved," he cut in. "You were already going through the drawers, you were already trying to find the paperwork. I let it happen, I shouldn't have." I watched her face shift, from defensive to stunned to something brittle. The mediator cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we need a moment." "No," Ethan said, "we don't." Courtney turned fully to him now, her posture cracking. "I was trying to protect the family, I was trying to stabilize things." "You were trying to control them," he said. "You still are." He didn't shout, he didn't point. He just stood. Courtney's voice rose, finally fraying. "I gave my entire adult life to this family." Pamela closed the file gently, snapping the latch, and Tom gave the reins to someone else. That broke her. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. She looked at me, really looked this time, and what I saw wasn't anger. It was panic. The quiet kind that comes when someone finally understands they're not being challenged anymore. They're being replaced. The mediator, bless him, tried to regain structure. "Perhaps we can reconvene next week, allow emotions to settle." "I won't be back," I said. "There's nothing here that requires negotiation." Pamela stood with me. Ethan didn't move at first. Then slowly he took the drawing again, folded it once carefully, and placed it in his coat pocket. "I'll walk you out," he said. Courtney stared at him, silently pleading. He didn't even glance back. I hadn't stepped foot in the house since the morning they sent me away. No one invited me back, no olive branch, no apology, but Pamela had flagged something in the records, a clause Tom had never removed, buried deep in the property paperwork. My name was still on the title. And the key in my bag still turned the lock. The door opened with the same soft click it always had. The scent was different, eucalyptus now, not the cedar Tom preferred. Something artificial masked everything familiar. It didn't matter, the bones were still ours. The foyer was colder than I remembered, stripped of photos. The oversized family portrait that once hung above the stairwell, the one from Zoe's 5th birthday, was gone. A smooth patch of drywall remained in its place, painted over. I walked through the house slowly, not touching anything. In the kitchen, the table was set with polished placemats and candles that had never been lit. The kind of decor you buy for staging, not living. I opened one drawer out of habit. It used to hold Tom's reading glasses, gum wrappers, and tiny mechanical pencils. Now it held protein bars and neatly rolled tea towels. I moved toward the study. That door still stuck a little at the top corner. It always had. Tom had promised to fix it, never did. When I finally pushed it open, the change was immediate. The bookshelves were bare, the leather chair gone. His model buildings, the ones he hand-cut from balsa wood in his early days, nowhere in sight. Only one thing remained. On the windowsill, his fountain pen. The one I had taken from his hand the morning he died. Courtney must have placed it there, thinking it decorative, not sacred. I picked it up. Heavier than it looked, worn smooth, the weight of thousands of signatures, of decisions that built empires and held families together. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. They hadn't found it. Beneath a false panel, just as he told me years ago, in case someone ever forgets who started this, were rolled tubes of sketch paper, dozens of them, marked with zoning maps, landscape elevations, handwritten notes in his tight, methodical script. One had Zoe's name at the top. I unrolled it halfway, just enough to see what he'd drafted: a multi-use garden and arts center located on a parcel we'd once bought quietly near the river, space for youth programs, studios, greenhouses. He'd circled it in blue ink and scribbled beside it, "Start this when I'm gone, she'll be ready." I took photos of each sketch with my phone, not to preserve them, Pamela would handle that, but to remember the moment. Not just the plans, but how they were hidden, trusted to be found by me. Upstairs, the hallway felt narrower. I stepped into what had been the guest room, my room once. It was painted now light sage, with one of those wall decals in faux cursive: "Breathe, stretch, heal." A plaque hung near the doorframe: "Wellness room." I didn't laugh, I didn't cry. I just took 3 pictures, one of the bed, one of the shelf where I used to keep Zoe's books, and one of the bare closet that once held my suitcase, the one Courtney had tossed without blinking. On the way out, I paused near the entryway and looked up at the bare stairwell wall. A hole still remained where one of the original frame nails had been, tiny, unpatched, missed. Like a scar under makeup. Pamela filed the paperwork before sunset. She'd warned me it would be technical, not theatrical. Motion to freeze all interior holdings within the primary residence of the Whitaker estate until final trust allocation. The house was no longer Courtney's to claim, not emotionally, not legally, not even decoratively. And she wouldn't know it until the locksmith arrived. Zoe sat at my small rental kitchen table, legs folded beneath her like a cat, a half-eaten sandwich resting on a paper towel. The sun had dipped low enough to streak the laminate counters gold. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the notebook paper we just unrolled across every flat surface. We were surrounded by maps. Parcel overlays, elevation sketches, margin notes in Tom's small, economical handwriting. Even Zoe's name appeared more than once, usually circled, sometimes underlined. She studied each page like it was written in another language, but she didn't look overwhelmed. She looked curious, alert, like she already understood more than she'd say out loud. Her finger paused over one of the large maps, a plot near the river just outside the old zoning lines. Tom had traced it in red ink, then marked the center with a tiny X. "He said this was for me," she said softly. I didn't ask when, I just nodded. "It still is." Her eyes flicked to mine. "But he didn't put it in the will." "No," I said, "he put it in my hands." She looked down again, tracing the red circle. "Why not just give it to me now?" I leaned back in the chair, hands folded. "Because he trusted you to grow into it," I said, "not be crushed by it. He needed me to protect it until you were ready. That's what he left me." She was quiet for a long moment. "Then what if I mess it up?" You won't, I said, but even if you do, it's still yours to learn from. Pamela stopped by 2 hours later with fresh paperwork and her usual punctual calm. She didn't stay long, just long enough to slide a packet across the table and have Zoe sign the cover page with a ballpoint pen that squeaked as she wrote. Designation of successor trustee, Pamela said, takes effect at 21, no loopholes, no rewrites. Zoe didn't flinch, she just nodded and signed, her name small and neat. Pamela looked at her with something close to pride. He left this for you, but your grandmother's the reason it made it to your hands. Zoe smiled, small and genuine. I know. When Pamela left, I pulled a second folder from the cabinet and placed it beside the development plans. A new scholarship. Named after Tom. It would fund youth programs in design, architecture, environmental engineering, all the things he built his empire around but never hoarded. The money came from the $19 portfolio. A fraction really, but enough to seed something lasting. Zoe opened it and read through the summary page. This is for real. It's already been wired, I said. Applications open next quarter. She leaned over and hugged me, not the careful, side-armed kind of hug she gave her father or friends. This one was full, steady, grounded. It lasted longer than I expected. Later that night, as I washed dishes, my phone buzzed. Zoe had gone home. The house was quiet again. I dried my hands and picked it up. Courtney had posted a new story. A photo of a sunset, filtered, moody, probably taken from the back patio of a house she no longer owned. The caption read, "You can lose everything and still be free." No tags, no names, but it didn't need any. I stared at it for a full minute, then clicked away. Pamela had already warned me the injunction had hit. The locks were changed. Utilities were paused pending trust allocation. Every interior asset was now on inventory, not to be sold, moved, or repurposed. Courtney had lost the house. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. But even now, she was still trying to script a version of events where she came out with the last word, the one with strength, the one with freedom. What she didn't realize was that real freedom isn't about escape. It's about ownership. Of truth, of consequences, of what comes next. We kept the dinner small. 5 place settings, 1 candle. The dining room of the rental wasn't built for ceremony, the chairs didn't match, and the table wobbled slightly if you leaned your elbow too hard, but it held like most things worth keeping. Pamela arrived first with a bottle of wine she said Tom once called overpriced but reliable. Behind her came Howard and Celia Brandt, 2 of Tom's oldest business partners, married 42 years and both sharper than they looked. They brought pie, homemade, pecan. Zoe was last to enter, cheeks pink from the wind, her hair pulled back in a rushed braid. She wore a sweatshirt over a dress like she hadn't quite committed to either version of herself that day. She looked older somehow. More ready. We didn't mention Courtney, not once, not her name, not her posts, not her absence. The silence around her wasn't awkward, it was intentional, a line drawn with care. We toasted Tom just before dessert, no long speeches, just the sound of crystal tapping and a few quiet nods. The word legacy came up but not fortune. We spoke of his blueprints, his stubbornness, the way he took his coffee like it was a military order. Zoe waited until the last fork had been set down before speaking. I brought something. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. Not one of her drawings this time, but the last page of the letter Tom had written me, the one I hadn't read aloud at the funeral, the one meant only for us. Zoe held it carefully. He wrote this part about building for what you can't see yet, she said, voice low but steady. About how some foundations are laid before you even know what they're for. She cleared her throat and read. To the ones who carry this forward, you won't always feel sure, you won't always feel seen, but you are standing on something solid, keep going. No one moved for a long moment. Pamela was the first to raise her glass again, to what's solid. We all followed. After everyone left, I washed dishes slowly, letting the hot water soak through the silence. Zoe helped, drying each plate like it was breakable even when it was. As she reached for the last one, my phone buzzed. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi," he said quietly, "I know it's late." I waited. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he continued, "for not stopping her for waiting too long." I closed my eyes, the faucet still running. "I don't expect you to forgive it," he said, "I just thought maybe you should hear it." My voice was calm, measured. "You still can," I said. He didn't answer right away. "Then thank you." I hung up without saying goodbye. That same evening, across town, Courtney attended a charity gala at the Terrace Club, a venue she'd once bragged about reserving 3 years in advance for Zoe's Sweet 16. She arrived alone. The press photos hit social media by midnight. Her dress was red, her expression neutral, no date on her arm, no family behind her. No mention of Whitaker Holdings. No mention of Zoe. I didn't click through the album, I just opened the folder on my desk marked Final Transfers and signed the last document. Pamela had prepared it that morning. Dissolution of shared holdings, Ethan Whitaker and Lena Whitaker. It meant we'd still be family but not financially bound. No more joint votes, no inherited risk, no path for Courtney through Ethan or otherwise to reach Zoe's trust. This wasn't punishment. It was protection. I signed it. Pamela would notarize it tomorrow. Before bed, I checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and passed by the table where Zoe had left the drawing of herself and Tom side by side on a bench beneath a tree. She'd drawn a tiny plaque under the tree trunk. "In memory of what we built before we knew we'd need it." It wasn't flashy, but it was permanent. Legacy looks different in daylight. The briefing was held in the east atrium of the Turner Arts Pavilion, all glass and clean lines with potted olive trees that had no business surviving Texas heat. The space had been donated for the day in Tom's name, one of many quiet gestures that had followed the soft launch of the foundation. No black dresses, no hushed grief, just future-facing plans live-streamed to an audience that had started asking different kinds of questions. Zoe stood beside me at the podium. She didn't fidget, she didn't lean, she just waited, chin up, watching the crowd gather with a calm that came from somewhere deeper than preparation. She looked like someone who knew exactly why she was standing there. Pamela gave the opening remarks, kept it short, direct, then turned the mic over to me. "Good morning," I began. "Today marks the formal launch of the Tom Whitaker Foundation, a development trust committed to green infrastructure, community arts, and accessible design for underserved youth across Central Texas." Cameras clicked, a few heads nodded, I didn't pause. This fund was not created after Tom's death, it was structured during his life, planned, protected, quietly assembled to ensure that the work he believed in outlived all of us, including the noise. I shifted slightly, letting the light catch Zoe's shoulder. She didn't flinch. "His will did not mention this fund because it never needed probate. It was private, intentional, and intact." Someone in the front row raised a hand, a reporter I recognized from the courthouse steps. "What would you say to those calling this a fractured family situation?" I didn't blink. "It's not fractured," I said, "it's redefined." That got murmurs, some curious, some cautious. Another voice asked whether Tom had always intended for his granddaughter to be named in the succession clause. I turned toward Zoe. She stepped forward, hands lightly clasped. "I used to think legacy was something adults handed down like boxes," she said, "but it's not, it's built, layer by layer. Sometimes it skips a generation, but it still lands in the right hands." Silence. Then applause, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady. Zoe stepped back, the press leaned in, Pamela gave me the smallest nod, the cameras kept rolling. Across the city, in a borrowed guest house on the edge of Lakeway, Courtney watched the live stream from her phone. Her name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not in the stat. It meant not in the credits, not in the footer of the foundation's website, which had gone live that morning. The homepage featured a message from me. "We don't resurrect the past, we protect what others try to bury." Lena Whitaker, founding chair. There were no photos of Courtney, no trace of her anywhere in the board listings, the advisory council, or the acknowledgments. She scrolled with a tight jaw, her phone gripped too hard. The connection buffered halfway through Zoe's speech. The screen froze on her granddaughter's face, clear-eyed, unshaken. Courtney tried refreshing, nothing changed. Back in the atrium, Zoe and I stepped off the podium and joined Pamela near the edge of the crowd. The energy was lighter now, people asking questions, not offering condolences. No one whispered about inheritance. They asked about next steps, about zoning approvals, youth programs, launch timelines. I could feel it, the shift from legacy to motion. From theory to fact. Then I saw him. Ethan. Near the back, alone, jacket off, tie loosened, no press pass, no intention to be seen. He didn't try to wave, didn't step forward. But he was there. He stayed until the last word had been spoken, then turned and slipped out the side entrance before the crowd began to disperse. Not hiding. Just knowing. Later, as we packed the last of the materials into the car, Zoe handed me a folded sheet of paper, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't a drawing. It was a printout from the foundation site, the homepage, the quote. She decircled one line and read, "We protect what others try to bury." Underneath she'd written, "Good, because I'm ready to dig." The land smelled like cedar and clean dirt. Not the manicured kind from corporate landscaping, but wild, sun-warmed earth that hadn't yet been shaped into anything permanent. It still held echoes of the past, a line of old oak stumps, rusted wire fence, an abandoned sign that once warned of zoning restrictions that no longer applied. This was the site. The Future Youth Arts Center, tucked just east of the riverbank on land Tom had circled in red long before the rest of us were paying attention. Now it was ours, fully cleared, legally protected, nearly ready to build. Zoe walked a few paces ahead of me, boots crunching over gravel, holding a binder full of paint swatches and room schematics like it was a school project that mattered more than any grade. She stopped near a row of foundation stakes and pointed toward the open air. "That's going to be the studio," she said. "Glass walls, west light, and a ceiling like a greenhouse." "Like the sketches?" I asked. "Exactly like them," she said, already flipping pages. We spent the morning measuring shade lines and reviewing layouts with the project manager Pamela had brought on. Zoe named rooms like they were characters, hope, memory, and one she lingered over longest, a quiet corner space meant for reading and restoration. She named it Balance. I didn't question it. By noon, my phone buzzed with a notification from Pamela. The subject line was curt, "Courtney again." I opened it. A forwarded email, 3 paragraphs, dressed in strained civility but transparent beneath the gloss. "I've been trying to reflect, though I'm not sure anyone cares to hear it. I do wish things had been handled differently. Perhaps when the dust settles, we'll all see that grief can make people act in uncharacteristic ways. In any case, I'm still here, watching, hoping. Don't confuse silence with surrender." No apology, just suggestion. A veiled threat disguised as mourning language. Pamela's reply was 2 lines. "All future communication must go through legal. This address is no longer monitored." The message was marked as read, but Courtney didn't reply. She never would, not directly. Her silence was never surrender. It was strategy. Later that afternoon, a delivery driver knocked on my rental door with a square box of white peonies. Not roses, not lilies, just clean, delicate flowers Tom had once planted in a corner of our garden and forgotten to water. There was no card at first. I thought they were a mistake. Then I found it, tucked beneath the folded invoice. One sentence in Ethan's handwriting. "Thank you for protecting her." No signature, no punctuation. Just the truth. I didn't respond, not with words. Instead, I sat with Zoe that evening and helped her upload foundation updates to the new website. She wrote the captions, I chose the photos. At one point she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me sideways. "She's going to keep trying, isn't she?" I didn't ask who she meant. Maybe. Zoe shrugged. "Doesn't matter, you already made it so she can't touch any of this." I didn't do it alone. She smiled, that quiet, almost grown smile that made her look more like Tom every day. After she left, I opened a private browser tab and searched for a nonprofit I hadn't visited in years. Larchwell Women's Recovery Collective. A tiny center, undersupported, long mocked by certain circles for being overly sentimental and poorly branded. I remembered Courtney once sneering at their mission statement, healing as a form of economic power, like it was a punchline. I donated $100,000. Anonymously. In the comment field I typed, "From someone who understands that healing is louder when no one is watching." Then I closed the laptop. Outside, the sun dipped low across the foundation lot, casting golden light across the skeletal outline of what would soon be filled with color, noise, youth, and purpose. Inside, I stood at the edge of the room Zoe had named Balance on her plans. It was still just dirt and empty framing. But I could already see what it would become. The suitcase had been in my closet for months. Still zipped, still marked with the faint scuff from the driveway where Courtney let it fall. I hadn't opened it since the morning Tom died, not out of fear, not even grief, just timing. Some truths need quiet to breathe. Zoe had left for her creative program at Dawn, a 3-week summer residency funded by the foundation she now helped shape. She hugged me tight at the gate, arms around my waist, cheek pressed against my collarbone. "It's our story now," she whispered. She didn't mean hers and mine, she meant hers and his. I nodded, let her go. The house was still when I returned. No buzz of emails, no shoes by the door, no Pamela on the porch with files, just me and the suitcase. I carried it to the kitchen table and unzipped it slowly. The clothes were still neatly folded, untouched since the day I packed them in a fog, pajamas, a cardigan, a pair of old reading glasses I hadn't realized I'd tucked inside. And the manila folder. Labeled in Tom's handwriting. For Lena, day of. I lifted it carefully, sat down, and opened it one final time. His note was short, no date, no greeting, just a few lines in his lean, upright script. "You always knew what mattered. Not the headlines, not the inheritance, not the noise. You saw the shape of things before anyone else. I trust you to carry the rest." There was no legal jargon, no directives, just the weight of his trust pressed into paper. At the bottom, he'd drawn a single arrow, pointing left. I turned over the folder. Taped to the inside was his fountain pen. The same one he used to sign his first loan, his last blueprint, the checks we mailed to charities before we ever had a trust, the one I had placed back in his hand the morning he passed and that somehow impossibly found its way back to me. I held it for a long time. Then I walked out to the backyard, lit the chimenea, and fed the note to the fire. Not because I wanted to erase it, but because it had already been lived. Ash rose and fell like slow snow. I kept the pen. That evening, I sat by the window, journal open, candle lit, and wrote in long, deliberate lines, not about Courtney, not about Ethan, not even about Tom. About the middle. The silence between the headline moments, the weight of holding something together when it wants to split. They tried to make grief a weakness. But it became my compass. Not the kind that points north, the kind that points inward. To what's unshakable. Later, I drove out to the property. No press, no guests, just the low hum of wind in the scaffolding and the faint flap of foundation banners rippling at the entrance. Hope, balance, memory. All caps, no frills. I walked the perimeter once, slow, deliberate, checked each lock, secured the last gate. Then I turned, one hand resting on the cool iron latch, and looked back at what we'd built, not just the structure, but the ground it rose from. We had buried nothing here. We had protected it. That was the difference. The wind kicked up dust around my ankles. Somewhere inside, the studio lights flickered on, triggered by motion, but there was no one there. Just possibility. I smiled, locked the gate, and left.